There's a scar over Shanks's left eye that fans have stared at for over 2 decades, always assuming it came from some legendary world-shaking battle. It didn't. It came from a nobody, a low-ranking, unremarkable member of his own crew named Marshall D. Teach, a man Shanks could have killed on the spot and simply chose not to. That single act of mercy let Blackbeard walk free into the world, and everything that came after, the murder of a beloved crewmate, the death of Portgas D. Ace, the war that shattered the New World, all of it traces back to one moment where the strongest man in the story decided to show kindness instead of judgment. But what if he didn't? Stick with me until the very end of this video because the answer isn't as simple as you think, and there's a twist waiting at the end of this that's going to change how you look at this entire story. Let's start with what we actually know because this moment carries more weight than it first appears to. Blackbeard back then wasn't feared, he wasn't respected, he was barely tolerated, a strange, unsettling presence even among his own crewmates, someone whose ambition clearly outpaced his standing. When he scarred Shanks's eye, it wasn't in some legendary clash of titans, it was small, almost petty, the kind of moment that should have ended with Teach being thrown off the crew or worse. Instead, Shanks let it go, and that decision, made with barely a second thought at the time, ended up shaping the next era of the entire world. So here's our divergence point. Same moment, same insult, same flash of violence in Teach's eyes, but this time Shanks doesn't walk away laughing it off. He ends it there, on that ship, before Teach ever has the chance to become anyone at all. No slow build toward betrayal, no years spent quietly waiting for an opportunity, just a threat recognized early and removed. And on the surface, this feels like nothing but good news.
Let's actually sit inside that feeling for a moment before we start questioning it because it deserves to breathe. Think about what this means first for Thatch. In the story we know, Blackbeard murders his own crewmate in cold blood just to steal the yummy yummy no me for himself, a betrayal so brutal it's still talked about as one of the most shocking moments in the entire series. If Teach never survives long enough to make that choice, Thatch simply keeps living his life, keeps being the warm, beloved presence he was on Whitebeard's ship, laughing with his crew, never becoming the reason an entire war eventually breaks out. Just imagine that for a second. One of the most senseless deaths in the whole series, quietly erased simply because someone stepped in before it could happen. And if Thatch lives, think about what that means for Ace.
In the story we know, Ace's entire arc after Alabasta is defined by grief and rage, hunting down the man who murdered his friend, a pursuit so consuming it eventually gets him captured and sentenced to execution. Without Thatch's murder, does Ace ever leave Whitebeard's crew to chase Blackbeard at all? Does he ever get captured by the Marines? It's entirely possible that in this timeline, Ace simply keeps living, keeps growing old alongside his crew, never becoming the martyr whose death breaks Luffy's heart in front of the entire world. Sit with that. Ace alive, still annoying his little brother, still laughing with Whitebeard's crew, still exactly who he was always supposed to become uninterrupted, and that leads us to the biggest domino of all. Does the war at Marineford even happen? Because remember, that war only exists because Ace is sentenced to execution and the world watches to see who's willing to fight for him.
Take away Ace's capture entirely, and you take away the reason for that war to exist in the first place. No Marineford means no Akainu killing Ace in front of Luffy, no moment where an entire generation watches Whitebeard, the strongest man alive, make his final stand and lose. Which brings us to Whitebeard himself, still alive in this version of the story, still commanding his crew, still standing as proof that family matters more than power. Doesn't this feel like the good ending? The one where the old man everyone loved simply gets to keep living, where a beloved crewmate never dies for nothing, where two brothers get to grow old together instead of one of them dying in the other's arms. I want you to actually sit with how good that feels for a second because we're about to pull the thread that unravels it. There's something quiet, almost too quiet, hiding underneath all of this.
Every single one of these moments we just celebrated, Ace surviving, Thatch surviving, Whitebeard surviving, they didn't just save lives, they removed something else too, something the story never treats as a coincidence, and that's where this stops being a simple story about mercy paying off. Because here's the twist. Think about what Marineford actually did for Luffy and his crew, beyond the tragedy of it. Watching his brother die in front of him is the single event that breaks Luffy completely, and that devastation is exactly what forces the 2-year time skip to happen. Luffy Luffy trains under Rayleigh because he's desperate, broken, terrified of ever feeling that helpless again. Zoro pushes himself to the edge of death training against Mihawk for the exact same reason. Every single member of that crew becomes dramatically stronger during those 2 years, and every single one of them is doing it because of a wound that, in this timeline, never gets inflicted. Without that war, without that grief, does any of that desperate urgency ever exist at all? And if it doesn't, the Straw Hats simply don't get the same fire lit under them. They keep sailing. They keep growing, sure, at whatever gentle, natural pace the story allows, but they never get pushed to their absolute limits the way losing Ace forces them to. Luffy never learns hockey with that same desperate life-or-death intensity. The crew that eventually stands strong enough to challenge emperors and warlords might simply never reach that level, not because they're any less determined, but because the exact tragedy that forged their resolve never happened to them. That's the bomb hiding underneath this entire what if. Save everyone you love, and you also quietly disarm the very thing that was supposed to make your crew strong enough to survive what comes next. And think about Shanks in the middle of all this too, because killing someone in cold blood, even someone who would go on to become a monster, isn't a small thing to carry either. In the story we know, Shanks is defined by his warmth, his easy laugh, his refusal to treat the world with the same brutal calculus everyone around him uses. If he's the one who ends Teach's life that day, does some small part of that warmth quietly disappear too? Does he become a slightly harder version of himself? Someone who learned early that mercy has a body count and carries that lesson silently for the rest of his life? Because here's what I think this story is actually trying to tell us, whether it means to or not. Grief and tragedy aren't just emotional beats sprinkled in for drama. They're the exact forge that makes these characters who they eventually become. Luffy doesn't become strong enough to stand with emperors by having an easy life. He becomes strong because he was broken once, completely, and chose to rebuild himself into someone capable of protecting the people he has left. Take away that breaking point, and yes, you save Ace, you save Whitebeard, you save an entire war's worth of casualties, but you also quietly take away the exact pain that turns a rubber kid from a small village into someone capable of standing at the top of the world. That's the trade nobody sees coming when they first imagine this scenario. A kinder story with a weaker ending. There's one more thing worth sitting with before we close this out, because it says something about Shanks that goes beyond just this one moment. A man capable of that much restraint, who could have ended a threat early and chose not to, isn't naive. He's someone who genuinely believes people deserve a chance to prove who they'll become, even when every instinct might be screaming otherwise. That belief is beautiful, and it's also, in hindsight, exactly what let Blackbeard become the monster we eventually meet. Maybe that's the real tragedy underneath all of this. Not that Shanks made the wrong call, but that the kind of person capable of that much grace in the world is also, by definition, the kind of person capable of being wrong about who deserves it. So let's come back to where we started. Shanks had Blackbeard, unknown and unremarkable, standing right in front of him, and chose mercy instead of judgment. What if he'd made the other choice? Thatch lives, Ace lives, Whitebeard lives, an entire generation gets spared from the war that was supposed to define them. But somewhere in that gentler, kinder version of the story, the Straw Hats never get pushed hard enough to become who they're supposed to be, and maybe that's the quiet price of a world with less grief in it. So tell me, now that you know the full cost, do you still think Mercy should have died with Blackbeard that day? Or was the pain we watched Luffy go through actually necessary for the story we love? Let me know what you think in the comments below.